So I then put Jesus is not prejudiced. And then I saw Jimmy put it out, Jesus not prejudiced. I think, right. So I believe we've got it right this time round. So first of all, what we'll do is we'll just look at what prejudice actually means. Who can tell me what prejudice means? We'll break the word down. What is it actually saying? To prejudge, right? So what does that mean, you reckon? What does to prejudge? That's right. Now, the word in English, is it overwhelmingly used in a positive or a negative sense? Negative. Mostly negative. And when people are prejudiced, is they're forming a negative opinion on somebody based purely on what they might look like, what they might be wearing, what car they drive, what job they have. It's a prejudicial position. But the word itself is actually not necessarily a negative thing. To prejudge is something that, can be positive or negative. Now, do we all prejudge people? Is that something we all do? Yes, everybody prejudges. In fact, prejudging people is probably a fairly necessary part about learning how to interact. So, for example, if you walked up to me and I'm looking like that and I'm in the street and I'm sort of like a little bit overwhelmed and sort of nervous, you could prejudge and go, he doesn't know where he's going, right? On the other hand, if I walked up to you on the street and I was like, Henry, what's going on? Tell me the time, what's happening? And I had a stern look on my face, you could prejudge and go, this person's angry, right? If I had an arrogant look on my face, you might prejudge that I'm arrogant, but maybe I'm just doing that because I'm in fact terrified inside. You've all seen dogs when they're barking really loudly and you think, oh, it's a big fierce dog. Most dogs that do that are actually terrified inside and they just don't want you to think they are. Well, humans do the same thing. So from a prejudging point of view, it's a necessary part of human interaction. We should be looking and reading people as we're talking to them. In my job, I talk to people on the telephone. And do you need me to do anything, Jeb? Aha, it's not working. I have to tell from the tone of their voice how they're feeling, right? Whether they're happy, sad. If I throw a joke and I don't get a laugh, well, I know now that they're not really happy at all. They're not going to be brought round. So I am prejudging all the time, trying to work out who this person is, analysing them, right? So to an extent, we do it, and it's a necessary part of forming relationships and doing things. But how much do you think you can really tell about somebody from the look on their face, the tone of their voice, what they're wearing? How much? As a percentage of the whole person, what percentage could you tell just from those early things? Throw a number at me. I'd say 20%. 20%, which means there's a whole 80% there that you don't know, that you might have horribly wrong. You might look at someone who's shabby. There was a famous story of a billionaire and he dressed like a hobo, drove a bomby old rusty car. He's a billionaire. And he loved telling stories about how people would prejudge him until he would let slip that he's actually worth a lot of money, right? So these sorts of things we can tell a little bit, but it's when we start getting wise and proud and we think, I know all about that person. Or you look at a certain area of town and you go, all the people there are thieves and liars. Or you look at a particular country and you go, that country again, no wonder they're going to war. And there might be things that lean in that direction, but you can't prejudge everybody. And we have to check ourselves, right? We should never prejudge in order to discriminate. Now, Jesus, that's just the dictionary definition of prejudge, unreasonable feelings or attitudes, preconceived ideas, thinking you know everything when in fact you don't. Now, Jesus did prejudge people, right? But he did so in order to meet needs. So when someone came to Jesus, Jesus was reading them, analysing them, trying to work out what kind of person they were. It says that Jesus, I'll show you a little passage. Come with me to John chapter 3. And could someone read verse 25 of, actually John chapter 2, verse 25. So it says here, the feast of many believed, but he didn't do miracles He didn't commit to him because he knew all men. And could someone read verse 25, Maggie? And then keep going, next verse. See that? He didn't need to be told what was in man. He knew what was in people. There was a man, old Nicodemus. Now, what kind of man was Nicodemus? Was he rich? Was he poor? Was he important? Was he insignificant? He was rich and important. He had a title, the Master in Israel. So you might say, well, I know a lot about the Bible. Well, I know a lot about it. I'm a rabbi in Israel. Well, Nicodemus is like, rabbi. Call my dog rabbi. I'm a master in Israel. And that was Nicodemus. He was the best of the best. People revered him. Right? And when he comes to Jesus, right, he says, Rabbi, we know you're a teacher come from God, for no man can do these things without God being with them. And then Jesus proceeds to talk to him. Now, if you've read the chapter, it's not an easy chapter to understand. Jesus speaks in a very mysterious way. He said, the wind blows where it wants and you hear the sound, but you can't tell whether it's coming or where it's going. So is everyone born of the Spirit? That which is born of flesh is flesh. That which is born of spirit is spirit. And there's a very mystical terminology. And poor old Nicodemus is like, what? Who? And then in the end, Jesus says, Nicodemus, people who come around at night, they generally only do so because they know that their deeds won't be manifest in the light. That's generally why people slink around in the darkness. Now, why did Jesus speak in a hard way with Nicodemus, do you think? Why do you think he did that? That's right. He wanted to show Nicodemus that you've actually got a lot more to learn. In fact, he said to Nicodemus, you've got to be born again. You've actually wasted your life. You've got to start all over. You've got to start from scratch. Now, how long did it take Nicodemus to be born again? Another couple of years. When Jesus was dead, that's when he said, right, I've got to turn my back. Any system that kills its own Messiah is not a good religion. I need to change. So the very next chapter, we have Jesus introduced to another person, a woman of Samaria. Now, how complicated is that message? What's the message that he gives to the woman about what's he offering her? He's offering her living water that'll well up and you'll never be thirsty again. Now, is that a hard thing to understand? Really? No. It's just a simple message. Why? Because he's talking to a woman that would go to the well all the time. So Jesus knew what was in man. He could prejudge, but he prejudged only to meet needs. Now, of course, he was in an environment like Israel. Now, the Jews were very prejudgmental, right? What did the Jews think of Samaritans? No. They said of Jesus, in John chapter 7, they said of Jesus, you have a demon, as in you're insane, and you're a Samaritan. so they had insane people, then Samaritans, right? So the Jews did not like Samaritans. What did they think of Gentiles? Did they like Gentiles, Jews? No, they didn't like Gentiles at all, right? So the Jews were very prejudicial. They always prejudged. And of course, they were God's chosen people. They were children of Abraham, and they were amazing. So let's have a look at this. And what we're going to do is we're going to have a look at it as if we were trying to study this for ourselves. Like how could we get the information out of this about how Jesus taught this person, this woman of Samaria? Now, I've got a little Bible software package here. This is the one I use. Anybody seen this? Have any young people used it? eSword? Yep, Jebediah uses it. So young people, this is endorsed by Jebediah. Right. Now, it's not the most expensive thing. In fact, it's free. There's a few things you can pay for. But up above here, you've got all the different Bibles. You've got your Strongs, King James with your Strong's numbers. And as you move over each one, it will tell you the meaning of every word. If you click and go like that, it'll search for where that word is used in the Bible. Right? And if anybody's ever heard, come on computer, stop going so slow. If anybody's ever heard any talks that I've done and think, how does he know so many quotes? Well, I only know half the quotes, because have a look over here. Treasury of scriptural knowledge cross-references. And look at all of that. Every single verse, right, it's got little references where these ideas come up. Right, a parcel of land that Jacob gave to Joseph. There it is, Genesis, and he gave him a parcel of land. And it brings you back to that passage. And here's another one where Joseph's blessing his sons, and he talks about it again. Joshua bringing people to Shechem, where Joseph's been buried. So now we're getting this picture of Shechem, the history of Shechem, just in your margin. Right? So it's a very, very handy thing to have because it will show related verses and related ideas. Right, so these little things are very useful. Immediately you can click on a different version of the Bible and you've got easy to read Bible, ESV Bible, Revised Bible, very literal, very dynamic translations, right? So it's a very, very good tool to use. So could we please read from verse 3? If you could read, please, Mr. Henry, verse 3 and 4 and 5. All right, so here is a picture of the land, right? Now, interestingly enough, the Palestinians occupy the West Bank, right, which is this part here and all through the west bank of the River Jordan. That's the West Bank. Now, there was also the Philistines in Jesus' day as well, but those probably weren't original Philistines. And guess what we have here? We have the Gaza Strip with Palestinians and we have the West Bank. So Samaria was around about the territory of the West Bank, right? Around the time that is there today. So there's Jerusalem here, and Jesus is going to go up to Galilee here. And so basically his journey, because Jerusalem was up in the mountains, would have taken him through Samaria, into there and up, of course, into Nazareth is where he ended up. Now, what do you notice about this place called Shechem in relation to the rest of the land? What do you notice about it? Where is it roughly? Is it north of the land, south of the land, or pretty much in the middle? That's right, pretty much in the middle. North of the land of Israel, we have hills, mountains, and fresh water and greenery. When we go to the south, what do we have there? There's a lot of desert. And this sea here, what's that called? The Dead Sea, because there's nothing alive in the Dead Sea. So that's significant. A little city in the middle of the land of Israel, green life at one end, dead desert in the other end, right? Keep that in your mind. Now, these Samaritans, what do you know about the Samaritans? Can anyone tell me about Samaritans? How did they come into being? Quickly, Sunday schools, teachers. Yes.
And their strategy when they took over areas was to take the people who lived there and swap them with people from somewhere else to try and prevent uprisings. So these were a mixture of people from all different places that the Assyrians and stuff.
That's right. So a mixed race of people. When the Assyrians cleaned out the 10 tribes, they mixed up all the nations, popped them into Samaria, and that was Samaria. That was the Samaritans. So the 10 northern tribes of Israel, when they were taken away, they were jumbled up mess, and that was Samaria. And this is the passage. So 2 Kings chapter 17 from verse 24. If you want to turn there real quick, we'll have a look. So 2 Kings chapter 24, and we're 17, verse 24. And yeah, Uncle Mike, if he can bring. So from verse 24. And so the story goes that lions came and killed these people because they were quite bad and evil. And God sent lions and they go, oh, the God of the land's unhappy with us. What are we going to do? And they sent word out and said, right, who shall we worship? And they learned a bit about God and they nominated priests. But then they decided to worship everybody else just to make sure no one missed out. So it was a very mixed up, jumbled up religion, and they ended up making priests out of the lowest of the people. So if you weren't very well educated, well, a perfect career path is a priest, right? And that's what they did. Now, when Ezra comes back into the land, these people were the biggest opposition. And they did not want Jerusalem to be rebuilt. They didn't want them to have a temple. And they wrote letters to the Persians saying, these people are troublemakers, don't let them do it. And they stopped the work. And of course, Nehemiah also had opposition from the Samaritans, which were a jumbled up mess of Arabs and Ammonites and Ashdodites and all the rest. So these people were a thorn in Israel's side. And they adopted the Jewish religion, but they didn't. They made up their own 5 books of the Bible. It's the Samaritan Torah, right? And they had a religion which they call Samaritarianism, and that's their Bible, the Samaritan Bible. And of course, these people, right till this day, you can find a copy of the Samaritan Bible. People do analysis on it to find out how it's different. And of course, they make the Samaritans the heroes and the Jews not the heroes. They had their own temple in Mount Gerizim. And they said, well, actually, Abraham offered up Isaac on Mount Gerizim in Shechem, not in Mount Moriah. So they changed certain things to make themselves obviously look good. And there was a lot of animosity between Jews and Samaritans when the Maccabeans came. So what happened is the Greek culture was moving through the land. And all these Jews thought, wow, we love the Greeks, their stadiums, their athletics, their Olympic Games, this is awesome. And they tried to make everything like Greek culture, to the point that traditional Jews said, we've had enough. And then they made a law, you've got to worship pigs, sacrifice pigs and offer sacrifices to Greek gods. And that was the last straw. The Maccabean Revolution happened, and this is traditional Jews that said, no way are we going to let Greek culture in, and they killed anything and everyone that manifested this Hellenizing spirit. And so these Maccabean people, it started out Matthias, and he had sons, Judas, Simon, and there was another one, and they started a revolution, and they actually won independence for the land of Israel. But I think it was Simon that moved up into Samaria, and he massacred a whole heap of Samaritans, trashed their temple, completely destroyed it because they had Hellenized. So then the Samaritans, a few decades later, got their own back. They went to the Jewish temple that was being built by Herod, and they scattered human bones everywhere and desecrated it for a number of days. And then there was a Galilean that came down, and he was murdered going through Samaria. So all the Jerusalem and the Judeans are like, we're going to kill the Samaritans once and for all. And all the leaders go, no, because the Romans are going to come and kill everybody. So there was a lot of animosity. They hated one another, right? And so, where is it? But Jesus, when he talks about his lessons, he uses the Samaritans a lot. Can you think of a parable of Jesus where he talks about a Samaritan? Yes, the Good Samaritan. Right, now it's interesting with that particular story, right, because in Luke chapter 10, and come there real quick with me, to Luke chapter 10, Jesus deliberately puts the Samaritan in there as the person who showed love to his neighbor, right? And then at the end of that parable, he says to the lawyer, and he says, it is Luke chapter 10, isn't it? Yes. In 37, he says, 32, Luke chapter 10, verse 32, sorry. So it says, the Levite passed, and a certain Samaritan, and all the rest. And then Jesus says, to which of these 3, verse 36, do you think was neighbor unto him who fell among the thieves? Now, what do you notice about the lawyer's response? Read it in verse 37. What can't he say? He can't say the word, the Samaritan was the goody. He can't say it. He goes like, he had to go, he who showed mercy. So he can't let it pass his lips, right? And so, and in John chapter 8, I've got that one up there. The Jews said, we're not right in saying you're a Samaritan and you have a demon. And Jesus ignored that and said, I have a demon. But in Luke chapter 17, Jesus cures 10 lepers, and one of them Samaritan. And the only person who came back and thanked Jesus profusely and offered him praise was the Samaritans. So Jesus had nothing against Samaritans. He used them in his parable, and he used them to show the Jews that in many ways these people had a much better attitude than what they did. All right. Now again, Philip in Acts, he goes down to Samaria and he proclaims the gospel. And there was an ecclesia all through Galilee, all through Samaria, and all in Judea. So the Samaritans embraced the gospel. They got baptized. As we know, lots and lots of people were baptized in Samaria. And remember Simon the sorcerer. He was trying to pay for the Holy Spirit. Well, that all happened, and then Peter and John went and they gave them the Holy Spirit, and they dealt with that particular issue. So that is the Samaritans. Now, come back with me to John chapter 4. And it's a good idea when you're doing your Bible marking, if you've got a little passage, is to write those key verses up there so that when you look at John 4, you get a very simple overview of who the Samaritans were. All right, but again, you can look that up simply by looking up the eSword, looking up Samaria, looking up all of those verses as they come up. Now, the word Sychar, where does Jesus go? It's a place in verse 5 called Sychar. Now, does anyone know the Old Testament variant of the word Sychar? What's that? It's where Abraham first came and offered an offering. Shechem, exactly. Now, the word Shechem in Hebrew means the back or the shoulder. So if you're a donkey, which some may say I am, you would hold your load like there, right in the back of the shoulder, right, where the strength of the shoulders is. And of course, people do that. They're holding, when there's something really heavy, they'll often sort of support it on the shoulder. You can carry all sorts of things on your shoulders that you can't carry in your hand. Different muscle groups come into play, right? So the word Shechem is a burden bearer, a place of burdens. Now, the word is also related to making decisions, hard decisions. Because when we are burdened by, shall I go this way, shall I go that way, what shall I do? It's like a burden on you, a weight on your mind. You don't know which way to go. And so there are related Hebrew words that also relate to decision making. Now again, the Jews had taken this Hebrew word and given it a tiny little twist. Instead of Shechem, they called it Sychar, right? Which is related. It sounds the same in Hebrew. But what does the word Sychar mean? Drunken. Right? So there's prejudice everywhere in this record, right? That they did not like these people. Now, let's have a little bit of a look at Shechem. Now, if we go and click on here, we see here the word Shechem. And if we search for it in the entire Bible, we end up with lots and lots of verses that all deal with Shechem. See? So it's a really, really handy thing if you wanted to get a really good overview. The other thing is there's a Bible dictionary down here and you can just look up Shechem, or these days Wikipedia is really, really simple. So we come to Genesis chapter 12 and we find that when Abraham first came into the land, he goes to Shechem near an oak and he builds an offering, an altar to God. Now, what does it say here in verse 6? It says, about that time the Canaanites were in the land. Now, remember when Abraham went up to Haran and they sat down and they didn't go into the land and they just worshipped and did what everybody else was doing. This time, Abraham, he comes into Shechem and he's got a decision to make. Do I join in with the Amorites or do I stay separate and only serve God? And he builds that altar and he says, I'm only going to serve God. And then from there, he goes to Bethel. And what does Bethel mean? Beth, house, El, God, house of God. Okay, so he had a decision that he had to make, and he made that decision. But there's an oak at Shechem where he made that decision. Now, have a look again at this idea of Shechem. Actually, no, we'll go to the next one, right? Let's go to the next one. So, come here. All right. Now, Shechem comes up again in Genesis 35. Jacob is now about to move down to Bethel again, and he's in Shechem, and he says to his family, we either serve idols or we serve God. If you want to serve God, you give me your idols right now, and we'll bury them under a tree that is near Shechem. Okay, so Shechem again is a place of making a decision. Are you going to serve God or are you going to serve idols? And I've got here Rehoboam. Remember, the people gave Rehoboam a choice. Which way are you going to go? Are you going to listen to the elderly people and look after us as a people? Or are you going to do exactly what Solomon did and keep taxing us to the point of rebellion? So Shechem is a place of decision. Shall we go this way or shall we go that way? Here we go. Come here. All right, so let's have a look now why this place might just be a place of decision. Now, we looked at earlier to see, well, it's right in the middle of the land. Left is living. Down the bottom is dead. And we do know the land is a parable. Where does the Galilee fed? What river feeds the Galilee? I don't even know the name of the river. It's north of Galilee. It's not the Jordan, it's another one. But do you know where that river comes from? It comes out at the bottom of Mount Hermon. It's a spring. It just rushes out constantly, right? And then it winds its way. Now, this is a freshwater lake in Galilee, and then it winds all its way down like a snake, and then it ends up in the Dead Sea, okay? Now, does the Dead Sea ever get filled? No. How come the Dead Sea doesn't fill up? Because it evaporates faster than it can fill. And so the Dead Sea is 400 meters below sea level, the lowest point on earth. The water is 30 times saltier than salt water. Has anyone swum in the Dead Sea? Put your hand up. Yeah, it's pretty awesome, eh? But don't get it in your eyes. It's like swimming in salad dressing. It's all slippery and a bit thick. I kid you not, it's like thick water, right? And and you just walk out, and obviously Uncle Matt's not as slim as I could be, and you get to around here where all the fat bits are, and you get lifted off the ground. You can't actually keep walking. It lifts you up. So you're bobbing like a cork like that. It's very hard to actually stay afloat. You've got to be here. It's a really, really weird sensation, right? So the lowest point on earth, dead, nothing's living, it's all desert. And halfway up here, and we know this from Joshua's record, there's a little town. And what's that town called? See that? So you see, the whole land is a parable. The whole geography of the land is a parable. So when the feet of the ark, the priests holding the ark touched the water, all the water rolled back to beyond Adam. Now that's a type of Christ who's going to overturn the cycle of the never-ending cycle of living to death, through the serpent, which is sin. You see the parable? So this beautiful mountain, right? Christ was transfigured on Mount Hermon, right? Closest to God. Highest point in Israel. Comes out the bottom. Living water into Galilee, then the descender, dead water past the town of Adam. The whole land is a parable. And we know when Jesus comes back, the whole geography of the land's going to be changed. There's going to be a big earthquake, a mountain in the middle, and what's this sea going to be called? It's going to be changed to the Sea of Life and full of living fish and things like that. So the whole geography is going to be changed when Jesus comes back. So right bang in the middle of the land is this place called a burden bearer where people have to make decisions as to who they're going to serve, life or death, blessings or cursings, God or idols. Do you join in with the Amorites or join in with God? Now let's have a look at this city because it's really quite cool. Now, sorry. Here we go, that's better. All right. Now, that's Shechem right there. So where it says Blata, that's probably the here we go, come here. Here we go, right. So that's Shechem there. There's Jacob's well. There's a great big church over it. It is the original Jacob's well. It has been revered for 2,000 years plus. Because as we know, the Samaritans revered it as well as Jacob's well. Right, so that is Jacob's original well dug by the man himself, right? It is still there today. Now, what do you notice about this place called Shechem, right? What's it in the middle of? There's Shechem there. What's it in the middle of? Two mountains, right? Two mountains. One on here called Mount Ebal and the other one Mount Gerizim, which is where the Samaritans had their temple, right? Now, when Moses took the children of Israel into the land, and he wanted them to have blessings and cursings, and he wanted them to choose God over choosing idolatry. Guess where he took them? Come on, Shechem. And he put half the children of Israel up against one mountain, and he put half the children of Israel up against the other. So they're looking here, they're looking there, and a little man jumped up onto the top of here, and another little man jumped up on here, and he shouted out, "Cursed are you if you do this." And I'm like, okay. And then the ones, "And blessed are you if you do this." And all the people are down in that little amphitheater listening to the blessings and the cursings being shouted out. So you can see it is a place of decision. Which way do I go? Left or right? Blessings or cursings? If you want those verses, right, this is where you find them. Here we go. So Deuteronomy 11, about the blessings and the cursings. And it says, when you come into the land, I want you to regularly gather upon Mount Gerizim and upon Mount Ebal, and shout the blessings from Gerizim and the cursings from Mount Ebal. And then in Deuteronomy 27, it again says, I want this amount of tribes to stand here and this to here, and they're going to hear the blessings and the cursings yelled out. So the geography is very impressive, right? It's very amazing. Now there's one last thing I want to impress upon you, and that is here. Joshua 24, at the end of his life, they're all in the land, and he wants to make sure the children of Israel choose life, choose what is good. So where does he gather them to make a decision? Shechem, exactly, right in the middle. And he says, now listen, I want you to fear God in sincerity and in truth. Okay, and so that was the buzzword of that whole speech, is worship God in sincerity and truth. Now a bit later on, now they signed a document and they hid it under an oak. And I don't have time to go into all of this, but this oak keeps on coming up. The same oak they buried their idols under, the same oak where Abraham offered up his sacrifice, and they wrote their contract saying, we're only going to serve God, hid it under an oak. So the oak, burden bearer, decision making, all that is this constant theme that goes through. So along comes the judges, and you've got Gideon, who saves Israel from the Midianites with 300 men. He comes back, he's a celebrity. Everyone loves Gideon. So he gets lots of women, and he has lots of wives, and he has 70 sons. And one son was the runt of the family. And the men of Shechem looked at this boy and said, you can be king over us. And so he got all of his brothers and killed them, but one escaped. And he ran up to the top of Mount Ebal, and he said, have you dealt truly and sincerely with Gideon's family by making this boy king and killing all of his brothers? Have you dealt truly and sincerely? Now, why am I labouring sincerity and truth, truly and sincerely? Where does that come up in John 4? Come on. Where does it come up? I'll give you a clue. Verse 23, 24, 25, it's in one of those things. The hour comes when true worshippers shall worship the Father in spirit, with your mind, your attitude, and truth. So you see where Jesus' mind's going with all of this, right? Sincerity and truth. So all of these things are associated with this little place, Shechem. Right? An amazing thing. The parable of the land. God's built lessons into the geography, even into the stones of this place. So we're going to come and have a look at this woman of Samaria. So he goes to the parcel of land that Jacob gave to his son Joseph. Now, before we go any further, I just want to show you something real quick. Come with me to Genesis chapter 48. This is not my point, by the way. I would love it to be, but it's just not. But I'm going to show it to you anyway, because it's a really cool point. All right, so Genesis chapter 49, and this is Joseph, where he says, I'm going to give you Shechem. And he's blessing Jacob is blessing Joseph just before he dies, okay? And he says in verse 22, and could you read that for me, please, Chris? Joseph is a fruitful bough, even a fruitful bough by a well. His branches run over the land. Now, what does the margin say for the word branches? So here is Jesus, who's the increaser, the latter-day Joseph, who was also a fruitful bough, because everywhere he goes, he brings life. He's sitting by a well, right? And who comes up to him? A daughter. You see where Jesus' mind's going, right? The parcel of land that Jacob gave to Joseph, and his mind wanders back to that blessing. Joseph is a fruitful bough by a well whose daughters run over the wall. And in comes this young lady. Another daughter's going to be added to the family of Joseph. So there is lessons and echoes everywhere, and it's seriously good. Now, back to John chapter 4. So this woman comes up. Now, what do we know about this woman? Tell me everything you think we know about this woman. What kind of person do you think she is, just from reading the record? Is she a really shy person, would you say, or is she a bit more maybe outgoing and louder? Well, I would say outgoing too, because most women back in those days, if a foreign person asked to drink, you'd either run away, not do anything, or just give them the drink and go. Right? You wouldn't engage in a conversation, especially if he's a Jew and you know he hates you, right? So you've got to be fairly confident to sort of go, hang on, why? Now, is she an ugly person, would you say? No, well, she's got 5 husbands and she's on number 6. So I would say she is fairly outgoing, and I think she's quite pretty. She's a very attractive woman. Right? She would have attracted men's attention. Now, pretty women, I've never been one, right? But apparently, true story, even in today's world. But pretty women apparently is very annoying sometimes being pretty, because everywhere you go, what tends to happen? What do men tend to do to pretty women? Yeah, they'll look at them, they'll whistle, they'll chat them up. Hi, how are you? Now, do you think this woman had men ask her for a drink before? Or ask her to have a drink? I think she would have had quite a few men to have 5 men and be on number 6. So she's used to men communicating with her. She would know what that's all about. And she'd be used to guys going, hey, darling, you want a drink? You know, hey, honey, you're looking pretty good. You want a drink? She would be very used to men making advances towards her. She would know what a man looks like when he is attracted to her. And unfortunately, men tend to have this certain look where it's just like a dog's like. Now, how did Jesus ask her for a drink, do you think? How do you think he would have asked her? It wouldn't have been like that. Would have been just a very neutral, very calm, very kind, can I have a drink? And then she would look at him. Now, what would she see when she looked at him? Now, if she was looking at a normal Jew, she'd be like, can I have a drink, please? Right? She would see that there would be hatred and prejudice in a normal Jew's face. But when she looked at this man, there was a very accepting, warm, kind, fatherly almost look about him. Not a threat at all. This man is not a male threat in the traditional sense of the word. As she is immediately intrigued, she's looking at him and going, I have never been asked for a drink quite like this by any man ever, and he's a Jew. As you can tell, she can't resist. She says, I've got to ask him. I've got to ask him. This is really weird. She goes, look, where is it? Verse 9. How is it that you, being a Jew, ask a drink of me, which is a woman of Samaria, because the Jews don't have any dealings with the Samaritans. Now that's in some Bibles put in brackets, where John's informing us that Jews do not associate with Samaritans. But I think it's just as good as if she says it to him. Well, we all know we don't talk to each other normally. You wouldn't even spit in my direction being a Jew. So how come you're doing that? Now, Jesus answered again in this very intriguing way. He knows that she's interested. She's curious. She says, who is this person? Who is he? What is he all about? Now, with Jesus and the way he talks to people and embraces people, we don't know a lot about his default look. But we can assume that he would have been a very warm, embracing person with a nice, friendly look. You know how sometimes well, you would know as children that sometimes adults come up to you and they've got the permanent frown on their face. It's like, Henry, what do you do? Maggie, could you do this over there? And they've got that sort of slightly superior look about them. It's just like, don't mess with me. You will do what I'm told because I'm big and you're little and I'm smart and you're dumb and all the rest. So adults can have that look about them, right? But what did children think of Jesus? They flocked to him. So he obviously wasn't this like, children, have you changed this nappies? I was like, hello, child. Oh. He wasn't like that. He would have been a very warm and embracing person. Now, another group of people that were used to being looked down upon, the scornful looks and spitting and all those, were tax collectors. Now, what did the tax collectors think of Jesus? That's right. When they heard that he was having a feast with Matthew, they came to him because they knew he would never kick them out and tell them where to go. Now, they would never normally join anybody's feast. If there was a party in the area, the tax collector was not invited. It was just a given. And if he turned up, he'd be asked to leave. They were used to rejection. But when they heard it was Jesus at that party, they came to him because they knew he would never turn them away and he would accept them and show an interest in their lives. And that case of the woman taken in adultery, where the Jews come to Jesus and it's like, shall we kill her? And the question is, they've got the rocks in their hand, and it's like they're looking at Jesus and they're like, to stone or not to stone, to throw or not to throw. And how does Jesus handle that situation? What does he do? He draws in the dust. Why does he do that? Because remember, he knows what's in humans. Why did he do that? Draw in the dust. What did it do to their focus? It took it from her and moved it where? Onto him. And now they're looking at him going, what's he doing? And so they're not focused on her anymore. They're now focused on him and what he's doing. And then he stands up and he says, let he who is without sin cast the first stone. And then he goes straight back and so now they're still looking at him, but now it's been gone back on them. So he's taken the focus from her to him, onto them. And now they're analysing themselves. And beginning from the eldest to the youngest, they all leave. And he's left with that woman. And she says, all your accusers have left. And she says, I have, Lord. And he goes, well, I don't accuse you either. Just don't go and sin again. So you've got all these examples that show that he was a very warm, embracing, kind person. Everything about Jesus would have smelt kindness. And so Jesus answers in verse 10, he says, if you knew the gift of God and who it is that says, give me to drink, you would have asked me, and I would have given you living water. Now, Jacob's well, and I'll show you, here's a picture of the original well, right? That's what they used to go down into. There were steps underneath there, and even more steps still, and there's a cave, and that's the original well. And then it goes down another 20-odd meters into the ground. It's a very deep well, and the woman says that, sir, the well is very deep, and you have nothing to draw this water from. Okay, so we know it was deep in Jesus' day, and it is still deep today, but there's an Orthodox church. There is a woman coming out with water in her thing from Jacob's well, and there's the residue of all the old temples and things like that, and that's an old postcard as well, and that's from Wikipedia. There's a monastery over it, like a Greek Orthodox thing, and there it is. That's the well down there. There's your bucket. And they still draw water out of it to this day. And every now and then they open it up for the public to take a picture of the well that Jacob made. Right, so that's Jacob's well. So she's intrigued. It's a deep well. You've got to go down into a hole in the ground and go down even further again. And she says, well, I'm interested in this well. Right? You have nothing to draw and the well is deep. Where is this living water? What's it all about? So she's very interested, and this man is intriguing her because everything about him is just so different to the kind of people that she'd been interacting with. Now, what kind of a reputation do you think she had in Samaria with 5 husbands and a boyfriend? Do you think she would have been seen as a noble woman? No. Be like, every bloke's had a kiss of that one, you know, it's just like, don't go near her, right? So she was again used to people looking scornfully down their noses. Okay, so then she says, are you greater than Jacob who gave us the well and gave his cattle? And he says, Jesus says this, now remember the well is deep and you've got to put it all the way down there. Now, what's the difference between a deep well that you've got to have effort and what Jesus is offering? Whoever drinks of this water shall thirst again. But whoever drinks of the water I shall give him will never thirst, but the water that I give shall be a well of water springing up into everlasting life. So one is a hole in the ground that's very deep, and you've got to go right down to get the water. What's Jesus offering? Is it deep? That's right. It's an opposite. It actually comes up out of the ground by itself. And Jesus deliberately contrasts her language and saying, well, this is something which, hey, it just comes out of you. It can't stop. Now, tell me, what is Jesus talking about? Is he talking about literal water? We should all know. What is he talking about? Yeah, the gospel message, right, that gives you a hope of everlasting life. It gives us values. It gives us a reason for living. It shows us what we can do in God's service. It gives us confidence that our lives are forgiven. It actually motivates us to be better people. And when we are better people, we feel a sense of peace, which then drives us to be even better people. And when we fall down, we've got a loving Father to forgive us, and we get back up again, and off we go again. And it's a very motivating thing because we're part of a grand plan of the God of the universe. And this is something that when people get it in their lives, they stop becoming addicts, they turn their life around, they become better people. They become good husbands and fathers and wives and all these things. It transforms people. It's like an energy that just wells up and wells up. And your life can throw problems at you. But that's fine because you can get above your problems. You can actually get to a higher plane where you can start to see things from God's point of view. So what Jesus is offering is not just a drink. He's offering something, of course, that we know is a hope, the good news of the gospel. Now, the woman is still very much stuck on water. So she says, well, give me this water that I don't thirst and I don't have to come here all the time. So she hasn't quite got the message yet. So Jesus says, go and get your husband. And as we know, this is what we concluded, that the woman's a pretty woman because she goes, well, I haven't got a husband. And Jesus says, well, you said that truly. You told the truth because you've had 5 husbands and the man you've got isn't your husband. And she's just like, how do you know? And she's like, you've got to be a prophet. And then she says, well, you know, our fathers worshipped in this mountain. So there was a temple in Gerizim, and the Samaritans said that was the proper temple of God, not the temple in Jerusalem. But you Jews say Jerusalem is the best place to worship. And of course, they trashed the Samaritan temple, the Maccabeans. And Jesus said, well, hey, the time is coming where it's not going to be Jerusalem and it's not going to be here. There'll be people all around the world that are worshiping God in spirit and in truth, sincerity and truth, right? So forget your icons, your temples, things like that. Eventually, this is going to be in people's hearts, not in a temple, and people all around the world, here in South Australia, in Adelaide, are going to be worshipping God in spirit and in truth. And he does say, because the Samaritans had a very confused religion, he says, no, this is Israel's hope. Salvation is of the Jews. This is Israel's hope, right? But the hour comes, in verse 23, and now is when true worshippers shall worship the Father in spirit and in truth. For the God-seeking people, God is looking for people. So was it an accident that Jesus sat down in the well? Who was God looking for? God was looking for her. Now, if you'd have said to a Samaritan or a Jew, well, this is the people that God's looking for, that woman there, they go, her? Her? Do you know about this woman? Have you heard about her reputation? She's on number 6 and she hasn't even bothered marrying him because it's probably not going to last that long. Her? That's what God's looking for? But God was looking for her and God found her. So what was it about this woman? Well, despite all of her mistakes and her problems, every mistake she made, she's thinking, I'm doing something wrong here. My life's horrible. I'm making the same mistake. there's got to be something more to this. There's got to be something outside of all this. There's got to be a meaning and a purpose that I'm missing. And she's looking for something better. So she was searching for meaning. She was searching for God. And God put Jesus right where he needed to be in order to save this person. Now, who else is she looking for? Verse 25. What's on her mind? I know, she says. Who's on her mind? Messiah. So she was thinking. She was looking for Messiah. She was looking at the world and going, this is messed up. The world's more messed up than I am. And I know that there's somebody coming who's going to fix it all up. And she was looking for Messiah. And Messiah found her. And there's an awesome thing. If you've ever seen, who's seen The Chosen, by the way? Has anyone seen The Chosen? Yeah. It's a series about Jesus. And they've got an episode devoted to this. And it's very, very well done. Like, obviously they fill in gaps and they create more of a backstory behind her, which we don't know whether or not that happened. But it's very well done in the way that communication happens and the way Jesus connects with her and the way she responds to Jesus. And it's really well communicated. So I strongly recommend you have a look at it. It's all free on the internet. The Chosen. Have a look. It's well worth a look. There's about 8 episodes. And Nicodemus also is amazing. It's a very good episode. It takes 3 episodes to get to the Bible. But once you get there, you think it's very, very good. Now, I want to just finish on one little thing, right? So when it says here, God is a spirit, they that worship him must worship him in spirit and in truth. What does that mean, worship God in spirit and in truth? What does it mean? Can anyone give me an idea or a guess? What's spirit mean? It's breath or wind? So as a breath, it's something that gives us life, but this is something that we can breathe in as well. We breathe in God's words, and that gives us life. So the word inspiration is to breathe in, right? So we must worship God in spirit and in truth. Is it talking about what we breathe, or is it talking about the wind? What do you think? Which part of spirit? Is it breathing part, or is it the wind part? Worship God in spirit and in truth. Absolutely. We must be inspired by God's word. We've got to breathe it in. We've got to drink it, right? We've got to drink it in. But then another word for spirit is wind. And what's wind? It's a force that you can't see. It's an immaterial force. Is wind made of flesh? No. So a ghost is a spirit. It's a force that's not flesh and blood. And ultimately, what kind of bodies are we going to be given in the kingdom of God? Bodies that are not flesh and blood, spirit bodies. So here is this idea of breath and wind. As a breath, it's ideas that inspire us, that change our lives, that give us life. The wind, an invisibly energized body. Okay, it's a force that's not made of flesh. Now, have a look at what Jesus does here, and I'm going to show you something really cool. All right? So God is a spirit. What part of spirit is that? Is God a breath, or is God an immaterial force or being? Yeah, so God is both. Absolutely, he is both. But God is spirit. He is not flesh and blood. But if you worship him, you must worship him with your breath. You've got to breathe God in. So you see there's a connection there. Now, if we worship, actually I'll just use my mouse. If we breathe in God's words over here, what will God ultimately make us? What will God give us? Bodies that are over here. See that? Now, come back real quick to John chapter 3. Remember, he's talking to Nicodemus, the master in Israel, right? And he's speaking in a way that Nicodemus could not understand. Now, have a look at what he says. He says, that which is born of flesh is flesh. So he's talking about being born again. You've got to be born of water and the Spirit. That which is born of flesh is flesh. And that which is born of spirit is spirit. Now, what's he saying? Now, these are connected. So if you are flesh in your mind, what will you become in your body? Flesh. But if you are spirit in your mind, what you become? Spirit in your body. So you see the connection. If you think flesh, you'll only ever be flesh. If you think spirit, you will one day be spirit. So he says that to Nicodemus in a very cryptic passage. And then with the woman of Samaria, he reverses and he goes, God is immaterial. You've got to worship him and breathe him in. So you see what's happening in Jesus. He's talking to these different people, but these common themes and ideas are playing out. Right? So this is really, and of course, Jesus, the woman, after all of this, she rushes away and she comes into her town and says, hey, this man's told me my whole life story, everything, all the details. You all know he told me everything. Come and see. And they all come rushing out and they invite Jesus in for 2 days, and he spends 2 days with them. Now, 2 days doesn't seem a long time, but some years later, Philip goes into that area preaching the gospel in Acts, and all these Samaritans are waiting for him, and they're ready and they want to believe. So just a simple story to an uncomplicated person with a history, and Jesus lights a fire. A wellspring is lit up, and she can't stop, and she has to talk. Now, when the disciples come, it says that when they came, they marveled that he talked with the woman. So there's the prejudice coming out again. They're astounded. The word is they're exceedingly amazed. It's like, oh, he's talking to a Samaritan woman. Like that. But they didn't dare point it out to Jesus because they knew what Jesus would say. All right? So that's probably about all we have time for. But I hope you got something out of that, because it's a very wonderful example of how Jesus called people that most human beings, if they use prejudice, would never dream of calling on. We would get blinded by their faults and their problems and their issues, and we fail to miss the fact that people, when they make mistakes, they're wallowing in their mess. That is when they're thinking the hardest about life. That is when they're trying to want to improve. That is when they're searching the hardest. When we're on easy street and we're driving around in a fancy car and ordering fast food and getting Uber Eats, we're not thinking about life at all. But when we have troubles and problems and trials, that's when we're looking, that's when we're thinking, that's when we're searching, and that's when Jesus found this woman. Right? So never, ever, ever be prejudiced in that sense. We use it to respond to needs, but beyond that, you've just got to do the hard yards and get to know people. Thank you.